the British Empire, the empire on which the sun never set. At its peak in 1920, it controlled nearly a quarter of the world's land and ruled over 412 million people. They had conquered nations, crushed rebellions, and bent entire continents to their will. They colonized India, dominated Africa, controlled the seas, and built an empire so vast that historians still can't agree on how they did it. But the main question still remains. Could the British Empire control Prime Donald Trump? Now, when we talk about the British Empire, we're talking about serious power. They had the Royal Navy, the most dominant military force on the planet. They had economic control over global trade routes. They had diplomatic networks spanning every continent. These weren't just good at controlling people, they were masters at it. They controlled entire populations through divide and conquer strategies, installed puppet governments, and crushed anyone who dared to challenge them. But here's the thing. Trump isn't just anyone. See, the British Empire was built on hierarchy, tradition, and following the rules. You bow to the Queen. You respect the institutions. You follow protocol. Everything was about maintaining order and structure. But Trump doesn't do any of that. He doesn't bow to anyone. He doesn't follow protocol. He breaks every rule in the book and somehow comes out winning. The British Empire needed compliance. Trump is the definition of non-compliance. Let's look at how the empire controlled people. They used soft power, education, culture, making you believe their way was the superior way. They made you want to be British. They made you ashamed of your own culture. Gandhi wore British clothes before he realised what was happening. That's how good they were at psychological control. But could they do that to Trump? I don't think so, bro. This is a man who put his name in giant gold letters on everything he owned. This is a man who said, "I alone can fix it," on national television. This is a man who looked at the entire political establishment, both parties, the media, the experts, and said, "You're all wrong. I'm right." And then he won. The British Empire controlled through prestige and respectability. Trump controlled through chaos and unpredictability. Completely opposite approaches. Now, the empire had another strategy, economic control. They controlled the money, they controlled the resources, they controlled the trade. If you wanted to do business, you did it on their terms. They owned the banks, they owned the ships, they owned the infrastructure. Economic dependency was their specialty. But again, we're talking about Trump here. This is a man who bankrupted casinos and came back stronger. This is a man who turned financial failure into a brand. He lost $1 billion and used it as a tax strategy. The British Empire would try to control him through money, and he'd probably just default on the debt, restructure, and somehow end up owning half of London in the process. The empire was predictable. They had systems, procedures, established ways of doing things. Trump's entire strategy is being unpredictable. You can't control what you can't predict. But let's not underestimate the British Empire. They weren't just powerful, they were smart. They had some of the greatest strategic minds in history. Winston Churchill, Benjamin Disraeli, Robert Clive. These men understood power at a level most people can't comprehend. They knew when to negotiate, when to attack, when to retreat. They played the long game. So, to counter this, we need to look at which version of Trump we're dealing with. Are we talking about 1980s real estate Trump? The young hustler making deals in Manhattan, using his father's connections but creating his own empire? Or are we talking about 2004 reality TV Trump, the master of media manipulation who understood that attention was the only currency that mattered? Or maybe 2016 campaign Trump, the political outsider who broke every rule and won anyway? Or perhaps 2020 President Trump, sitting in the Oval Office with the nuclear codes, commanding the most powerful military in history? Because each version has different strengths. Real estate Trump understood leverage. He knew how to make people think they were winning while he was actually getting everything he wanted. The British Empire was good at making colonies think they were being civilized while they were being exploited. This would be a battle of who could out-manipulate whom. Reality TV Trump understood spectacle. He knew that if you controlled the narrative, you controlled everything. The British Empire controlled through institutions and tradition. Trump would just create a bigger, louder show that made their institutions look boring and irrelevant. Campaign Trump understood disruption. He took a system that had existed for decades and flipped it upside down. The British Empire was all about maintaining the existing order. Trump was about burning it all down and building something new with his name on it. President Trump had actual power, military power, economic power, the ability to move markets with a tweet. The British Empire had control over their territories, but Trump had control over the world's largest economy and military. That's a different level entirely. Now here's where it gets interesting. The British Empire's greatest strength wasn't just their military or their economy. It was their ability to make you fight amongst yourselves while they sat back and profited. Divide and conquer. They did it in India, splitting Hindus and Muslims. They did it in Africa, drawing borders that created eternal conflict. They did it everywhere. And guess what? Trump does the exact same thing. He divided Republicans and Democrats like never before. He made people fight over everything. Media, facts, reality itself. While everyone was arguing, he was doing whatever he wanted. The British Empire would try to divide and conquer Trump, but he's already the master of division. You can't use someone's own strategy against them when they're better at it than you are. But the British Empire had something Trump never had: infinite patience. They played the 100-year game. They waited, they planned. They slowly tightened their grip over generations. Trump operates in news cycles. His attention span is measured in tweets, not decades. The empire could potentially wait him out, bore him, make the whole thing so bureaucratic and slow that he just loses interest and moves on to the next thing. That's actually their best strategy. Don't fight Trump directly. Don't try to control him through force or money or prestige. Just drown him in paperwork, committees, procedures, protocols. Make everything take forever. Death by 1,000 meetings. The British civil service was legendary at this. They could tie anything up in red tape for years, but even that might not work because Trump has one ability that's almost supernatural. He can make things about him. Everything becomes about Trump. The British Empire would try to control the situation, and somehow Trump would make it all about whether people loved him or hated him. And once it's about that, he's already won, because he's at the center of attention. The empire controlled through making you irrelevant if you didn't comply. Trump made himself impossible to ignore whether you complied or not. Let's talk about the royal family, the ultimate symbol of British power and control. They represent tradition, continuity, stability, everything the British Empire stood for. They've survived for over 1,000 years by adapting, by being what people needed them to be, by staying above politics while secretly influencing everything. Could they control Trump? Would Trump bow to the Queen? We actually know the answer to this because Trump met the Queen. And while he technically followed protocol, everyone could see he was uncomfortable with it. He walked in front of her. He shook her hand too long. He was Trump, even in front of the Queen. And that tells you everything you need to know. The royal family represents everything Trump isn't. Old money that doesn't talk about money. Power that doesn't need to prove itself. Influence that works behind the scenes. Trump is new money that puts his name on everything. Power that constantly needs validation. Influence that demands the spotlight. These two forces are fundamentally incompatible. Now, I have a theory. I think there are some people in history who are simply uncontrollable. Not because they're the strongest or the smartest, but because they operate on a completely different wavelength than everyone else. They don't follow the same rules. They don't respond to the same incentives. You can't threaten them because they don't fear the same things. You can't bribe them because they don't want what you're offering. Alexander the Great was like this. Napoleon was like this. They broke every convention and somehow it worked. The British Empire eventually fell to people like this. Gandhi, who they couldn't control because he didn't want what they were offering. He didn't want wealth or power or prestige. He just wanted them gone. Trump is different from Gandhi in every way except one. He also can't be controlled through conventional means. The British Empire's entire playbook was conventional. Establish dominance, maintain order, control through institutions. Trump's entire playbook is unconventional. Create chaos, break norms, control through personality. So could the British Empire control prime Donald Trump? I think we all know the answer. They could conquer nations. They could rule over hundreds of millions. They could build the greatest empire in human history, but control one man who doesn't care about any of that. One man who would probably try to buy Buckingham Palace and turn it into a hotel. One man who would look at the entire British establishment and say, "You're fired." The British Empire controlled through making you want to be part of the system. Trump's entire brand is being anti-system. You can't control someone by offering them a seat at the table when they'd rather flip the table over and build their own. But then again, whenever you ask people who built the greatest empire, they will say many names. The Romans, the Mongols, the British. But whenever you ask who is the most unpredictable force in modern politics, everyone will say only one name: Donald Trump.